Welcome to Narrative Strokes. Today we are listening to I Took a Dare Too Far, and Now Something Follows Me. I've always been the quiet one, the observer, the one who listens but never speaks up. My friends, if you could even call them that, liked to joke about it. They'd say things like, "You're such a nerd, Sarah, loosen up," or "Are you still playing the good girl card?" But it wasn't about being good. It was about staying out of trouble, staying safe. I'd learned long ago that the more you blend into the background, the less likely you are to get hurt. I guess that's why, when they dared me to go to the old house on the hill, I felt a mix of dread and excitement. It wasn't just any dare. It was the dare. The kind that made you either a legend or a joke. And I wanted to be something more than the invisible girl who stood on the sidelines. The house was a burnt-out shell, a remnant of a time before. People called it the Haunted Mansion now, though no one really knew why the fire started. It had happened years ago, back when the house was still grand and imposing. But now, it was nothing more than a skeleton of wood and stone. Darkened windows stared like empty eyes, and the scorched walls had a strange, mournful beauty to them. The dare came after school, when I was walking home alone. A group of classmates, the usual suspects, Jessica, Tom, and Ryan, approached me with their usual smirk. "Sarah," Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've always been so careful, too careful. But we're gonna change that. You're going to the old house tonight." My stomach twisted. I knew what she meant. The old house was infamous in our town, and no one dared to go inside. Rumors swirled about it. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was haunted by the souls of the family who once lived there. People said the fire had been no accident, that it had been set by someone who was trying to destroy something that shouldn't have existed. "You should go. We'll wait here and see how brave you really are," Tom added, his grin wide, challenging. The dare was meant to humiliate me. They all thought I wouldn't go. They thought I was too scared, too timid to do something like that. But there was something else at play inside me, a need to prove myself, to push past my fear. It was foolish, but I said, "Fine, I'll do it, but I'm not going alone." Ryan and Jessica exchanged looks, but they didn't protest. They agreed, and the plan was set. I was going to the haunted house. The evening sky was thick with dark clouds, the kind that made the world feel heavy and uncertain. A gust of wind tugged at my jacket as I made my way toward the hill. My heart was a constant thud in my chest, loud and frantic. My friends weren't with me yet. They said they'd follow behind, watching from a distance. I didn't care about them anymore, though. The fear of the house gnawed at me. The closer I got, the more the air changed. It felt colder, denser, as if something was pressing down on me. The trees surrounding the property stood like twisted skeletal figures, their branches clawing at the sky. The path leading up to the house was overgrown with weeds, the ground uneven and damp beneath my boots. My breath came in shallow gasps, and every step I took felt heavier, like I was walking through thick fog. Each moment dragging me closer to something I didn't fully understand. I paused at the foot of the steps that led to the front door. The mansion loomed before me, its dark, jagged silhouette cutting through the night sky. A sense of something ancient and wrong, hung in the air. The house felt alive, watching me, waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I pressed forward, my hand trembling as I reached for the brass handle. The door creaked open, its rusty hinges protesting my intrusion. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay, and dust floated in the dim light that managed to filter through the cracks in the walls. I stepped into the darkness. The floor creaked beneath my weight, each step echoing in the stillness. I glanced around, trying to calm my racing pulse. The walls were charred, burned black in places, but the house still stood. How could something like this still be here? How could it have survived fire like that? I knew the story, of course. The house had once belonged to the Bennett family, who had lived there for generations. The fire had taken everything except for the stories, the rumors, the whispers that still clung to the house, even years after the flames had faded. I moved further into the house, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps. The house seemed to breathe with me, shifting around me, pulling me deeper into its embrace. At first, I didn't notice the door. It was tucked away at the back of the hall, almost hidden, as if the house didn't want me to see it. I almost passed it by, but something stopped me. A strange pull, a sense of urgency that I couldn't explain. I reached for the doorknob and twisted it. It opened without resistance. The room was unlike any other in the house. While the rest of the mansion had been ravaged by the fire, this room had somehow escaped its wrath. The floor was covered in dust, but there were no burn marks. The furniture, though old and worn, was still intact. It was as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it untouched. And in the center of the room, sitting atop a dusty table, was an old hat. It was a top hat, its fabric faded and frayed with age. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like it was calling to me. I hesitated, my fingers hovering just above it, a chill running through my bones. I should have left it there. I should have turned and walked away. But instead, I picked it up. The moment my fingers made contact with the fabric, a jolt of cold electricity shot through my arm. My heart skipped a beat, and I gasped, pulling my hand away as if the hat had burned me. But it hadn't. It had felt like something else, something ancient and dangerous. I stared at the hat, feeling a strange pull, an overwhelming compulsion to put it on. The desire to wear it was almost overwhelming, and for a split second, I thought I might. But then the room seemed to shift. The shadows grew deeper. The air grew colder, suffocating. And I realized, with a sudden bone-deep certainty, that I needed to get out of here. I grabbed the hat, clutching it tightly, and turned to leave. But as I walked back through the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something had seen me, something that had been waiting. The hat wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a presence, a weight in my thoughts, my dreams. The moment I returned home, I placed it on my bed and tried to forget about it. I tried to tell myself it was just a stupid dare, that the house had messed with my head, and that I needed to stop letting it get to me. But the next night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. The hat. It was calling to me again. I got up, walked across the room, and found myself holding it. The fabric was cold, but the moment my fingers touched it, I felt the same jolt of energy. This time, I didn't pull away. Instead, I placed it on my head. For a moment, everything seemed fine. But then the thoughts started. Strange, intrusive thoughts. Thoughts that weren't mine. thoughts of anger, of resentment. I felt my heart race, my breath quicken. My mind became a tangle of emotions, dark, dangerous emotions. I felt like I was losing control, like the hat was pulling at the deepest, most hidden parts of me. I took it off immediately, throwing it onto the floor. My hands were trembling. It was the hat. The hat was doing this. I spent the next few days in a daze, consumed by the thoughts that the hat had planted in my mind. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the room in the house. I saw the hat, and I knew that it was cursed. I did some research. I dug through old records, finding out about the Bennett family and their dark history. The man who had owned the hat was a well-known occultist, obsessed with controlling minds, with bending people to his will. The house had burned down during one of his experiments, and no one knew if it was an accident or something more sinister. But I knew the hat was more than just a relic. It was a weapon, and it was slowly taking control of me. I had to destroy it. I had to bury it. But where? Where could I hide something so evil? I went back to the house, the place where it had all started. The wind howled around me as I climbed the hill again, the house looming in the distance. The closer I got, the more I felt the pull, the urge to put the hat back on, to give in to its power. But I couldn't, not anymore. I dug a hole in the backyard, my hands shaking as I buried the hat deep beneath the earth. When it was done, I stood there, panting, heart hammering in my chest. I had done it. I had rid myself of the hat. But as I turned to leave, I felt it. The weight, the presence, the feeling that I wasn't alone. And deep down, I wondered if the hat had truly gone, or was it just waiting for someone else to find it? It's been weeks since I buried the hat in the backyard of that house. I told myself I was free, that it was over. I tried to move on, to pretend that I hadn't spent countless nights lying awake, my body covered in a cold sweat, wondering if the hat had somehow found its way back to me. But as much as I tried to convince myself that the worst was behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every day a faint chill lingered in the corners of my house. Every night the dreams came back, dark, twisted visions that didn't belong to me. I couldn't sleep without seeing shadows, hearing whispers, feeling the cold breath of something ancient and malevolent at my back. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. It was the sound of something scraping against the window that night that made me snap. I woke up to the noise, like fingernails on glass, sharp and unnerving. My heart raced in my chest as I sat up, my eyes darting around the dark room. I reached for the lamp, flicking it on, but the room remained silent, empty. I told myself it was just the wind, that it was nothing, but then I saw it, the faint outline of something in the corner of my room. A shadow that didn't belong. It was too tall, too dark. My breath caught in my throat as the shape moved closer. And I realized with a jolt that it was the same shape from my dreams, the one that had haunted me ever since I first found the hat. I stood up quickly, my legs unsteady, and rushed toward the door. But as I passed the desk, I froze. There, on the edge of the table, sat the hat. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. I buried it. I buried it so deep that no one could have found it. And yet, there it was. I I took a step back, my hands trembling. The weight of it pressed down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, like it was pulling me toward the hat. No, I whispered to myself. No, I won't do it. I won't let it control me again. But it was already too late. The whispers started again. The coldness returned, and like a puppet, my hand reached out for the hat, the compulsion too strong to resist. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. It was like the room around me had gone silent, like time had slowed down. The hat seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if it was calling me, pulling me closer with an invisible thread. I could feel it deep in my chest, a presence that wasn't mine, a darkness that wasn't mine. It spoke to me, but not with words. It was something deeper, something primal. It whispered in the back of my mind, urging me to wear it, to take control, to give in to the power it offered. "You are stronger than this, Sarah," it seemed to say. "You can be whatever you want. Just wear me, just put me on." I shook my head violently, trying to push the thoughts away. I knew better. I knew what it would do to me if I put it on. I could feel the weight of that terrible choice pressing on me. The coldness at the edges of my mind, the creeping darkness that threatened to drown me. But the temptation was overwhelming. The promise of power, of control, it was too much. "No," I whispered, forcing my hand to pull away, to step back. "I won't let you do this." I turned and ran for the door, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just had to get out. I needed to escape the presence, the thing that was waiting for me. I stumbled into the hallway and paused, gasping for breath. My skin was clammy, my pulse erratic. The house was silent now. Too silent. But the weight of something unseen pressed in on me from every direction. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let the hat consume me again. But as I stood there, a thought lingered in my mind. If the hat had returned to me, what if it had never truly left? The next morning, I found myself standing in front of the window, staring out at the same house I had tried so hard to escape. The shadows in the yard felt thicker now, as if the house had grown more oppressive, more alive with something dark and ancient. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me, waiting for me to return. What I had seen in my room had only been an illusion, a trick played by the hat to confuse me. The real one was still buried in the ashes, and I knew I couldn't just leave it buried. Not anymore. The hat wanted something from me, something I wasn't ready to give, but I had no choice. It wouldn't stop until it had me. I had to go back, but this time I wasn't going to bury the hat. I wasn't going to try to run from it. I was going to end it once and for all. The journey back to the house felt different. The air around me seemed colder, more suffocating. I had the distinct sense that the house was pulling me in, luring me closer with every step. Each time I exhaled, my breath turned to mist, and the silence around me felt unnervingly loud. I reached the backyard, where I had buried the hat, and my hands shook as I began to dig. The earth was hard and cold beneath the shovel, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The thought of the hat, its power, its manipulation, drove me forward. When the hole was deep enough, I pulled the hat from its grave, and this time, I didn't hesitate. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, a chill ran up my spine, and the whispers returned. "You cannot bury what feeds." I could feel it in my bones, the hat's hunger, the power it offered. And yet, as I held it in my hands, I realized something. The hat was not just feeding on my fear, it was feeding on my desire to be more, to be something I was not. For the first time, I understood. The hat had never been about control or power. It was about what I lacked. It was about taking away everything that made me, me, and turning me into something else. But I wouldn't let it. I crushed the hat in my hands, forcing myself to feel the rough fabric tear. The whispers screamed in my ears, louder and more frantic, but I held on. I didn't let go. I walked inside the house and threw the hat into the fire pit that had been used long ago by the Bennett family. The flames roared to life, engulfing the hat completely, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt silent. I left the house that day, and I never looked back. The whispers ceased, and the cold faded, and the oppressive weight lifted from my chest. But as I walked away, there was a lingering sense of unease in the air. The house had been quiet, but not gone. It was still there, standing as it always had, watching. And deep down, I knew something. I knew that the hat wasn't the only thing the house had claimed. It had claimed parts of me too, and maybe it would come looking for more. It's been months since I destroyed the hat. At least, that's what I tell myself. I should be able to move on. I should be able to live a normal life again. But every day feels like I'm walking on a razor's edge, always just a step away from falling back into that darkness. The shadows in my house have gotten worse. Sometimes, I swear I hear footsteps when no one is there, or doors creak open when I'm alone. I've told myself it's nothing, just my overactive imagination. But deep down, I know better. It started with the dreams. They came again, just like before, only this time, they were different, more vivid, more real. I see the house in my dreams, but it's not the charred wreck it once was. In the dreams, it's whole again, pristine, as if the fire never touched it. I'm standing in the hallway, just like I did that night. But something's different. The air feels thick, heavy, and when I look down at my hands, I see the hat, the cursed top hat. It's there, sitting on the floor, waiting for me to put it on. And I always do. In the dream, I can't resist. It's like it calls to me. It whispers too powerful to ignore. But each time I wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, I tell myself it's just a nightmare, that the hat had gone, that I burned it, I destroyed it. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach says otherwise. The hat is still out there. I know it. I feel it. It was a Thursday when I saw it again. I was walking home from school, my mind heavy with the constant weight of unease. I had been going through the motions of normal life, trying to pretend that everything was okay, but it was getting harder. The dreams, the cold, the feeling of being watched, it was all too much. That's when I saw it. The house. It shouldn't have been there. It couldn't have been. The house had burned to the ground, reduced to ashes and charred wood. But there it was, standing tall at the top of the hill, its dark silhouette against the sky, like some nightmare I couldn't escape. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The wind howled around me, but it didn't drown out the sound of my racing thoughts. How could this be? How could the house be here? I took a step forward, and before I knew it, I was running. The house felt different this time. There was no chill in the air, no unsettling whispers, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. I could feel it, in the very walls of the house, in the silence that stretched out around me. The air was thick with something something that couldn't be named. I stepped inside. The smell of decay was gone. The walls were intact. There were no signs of the fire. Everything was restored, just as it had been in my dreams. The same unease gripped me, the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could almost hear the soft scrape of footsteps behind me, faint and eerie. But when I turned around, there was no one there. I moved deeper into the house, each step heavier than the last, as if the house itself was trying to pull me in. The hallway stretched out before me, and I remembered the way to the room where I first found the hat, the room that had survived the fire. I hesitated at the door. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't stop myself. The door creaked open with a slow groan, and there it was, on the table. The same hat, the top hat. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I knew what this meant. The hat had returned. It was calling to me again. I stood there, frozen, my breath shallow. The room seemed to close in on me. The whispers returned, soft at first, like a breeze, and then growing louder, filling my mind. It was the same voice, the same compulsion. Put it on. You need to wear it. You can have everything you ever wanted. I shook my head, trying to tear myself away, but the whispers were too strong. The room seemed to tilt, and I felt like I was drowning in darkness. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The hat was too powerful. It always had been. Before I could stop myself, my hands reached for it. I was going to put it on. I didn't even know why. The whispers, the power, it was all too much. But just as I lifted the hat toward my head, I saw something. A flicker of light, a shadow that moved in the corner of my eye. I froze. There, in the corner of the room, stood someone. A figure. I could barely make out the shape, but there was no mistaking the presence. It was him, the man who had once lived here. The occultist whose obsession with power had destroyed everything. The one whose presence had left its mark on the house, on the hat. He was standing there, his face obscured in the shadow, but his eyes were burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His voice echoed in my mind, not in words, but in a feeling, a sensation of rage, of despair, of something lost. You are not alone, his presence seemed to say. My hands trembled, and the hat dropped from my fingers, falling to the ground with a soft thud. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The air around me felt thick with malevolence, suffocating me, closing in. And then I realized something terrifying. The house wasn't just haunted by the spirits of the Bennett family. It was haunted by something far worse. The man who had once called this place home was still here. His spirit, his rage, it had never left. He had become part of the house, part of the hat, part of everything. And now, he was calling me to finish what he had started. The man's form flickered again, his shadow stretching and warping in the dim light of the room. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. Then slowly, he spoke. It wasn't with words, but with thoughts. His thoughts infiltrated my mind, filling the empty spaces, drowning me in his hatred. You cannot escape, he whispered. You never could. I backed away, stumbling, my heart racing. I couldn't take it anymore. The pressure, the voices, the presence. It was too much. I turned and ran. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the stairs, through the hallway, out the front door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I finally reached the bottom of the hill, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. The house loomed above me, silent once more. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel it. The pull, the whispers, the presence of the man, of the house. They were not done with me. I wasn't free. Not yet. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. The house, the hat, they're always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to finish what I started. But I won't. I won't let them win. I'll fight this. I have to. The hat may never truly be destroyed, and the house may never truly be gone. But I won't give in. Not this time. I'll find a way to stop it. And I'll make sure the house never claims anyone else. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my bed, knees pulled to my chest, heart pounding in my ears. The house, the hat, the whispers. It was all still with me, lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. I knew it wasn't over. The hat had returned before. It would again, unless I found a way to end it for good. I needed to go back. But this time, I wouldn't just try to run or bury it. No, this time, I was going to destroy it in a way that it couldn't come back. I grabbed an old metal box from the garage. It was dented, rusted at the edges, strong enough to contain the hat while it burned. If I could get the fire hot enough, the metal would warp, break apart, and take the hat with it. I wasn't sure if it would work, but it was my best shot. Then I grabbed gasoline and matches. I didn't know if the fire would destroy it completely. After all, it had survived the first one. But I had to try, and if it didn't work, then I'd bury it somewhere no one would ever find it. I took a deep breath, shoving down the fear clawing at my gut. Tonight, it ended. The walk to the house felt different this time. Heavier, more final. As I reached the front yard, I realized the house had changed again. It wasn't just standing tall and restored like before. Now, it was alive. The windows flickered with movement, the shadows behind them twisting like something was watching me from inside. The door, slightly ajar, seemed to breathe, exhaling cold air into the night. It knew I was coming. I gritted my teeth, stepping inside. The whispers greeted me immediately, louder than ever. They swirled around me, crashing into my skull like waves. You cannot fight this. You are ours. Wear it. Accept it. I forced myself forward into the hallway, into that room. And there it was, the hat, sitting in the center of the table, like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated. Then I grabbed it. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, an electric jolt shot up my arm. A blast of cold seeped into my bones, like the house itself was trying to sink into my skin. My vision blurred. The walls around me shifted, and suddenly, I wasn't in the burnt house anymore. I stood in the same house, but it wasn't decayed and broken. It was whole. Warm candlelight flickered against the walls. The air smelled of burning wood and old books. I wasn't alone. The man sat at the table in front of me, facing away. His presence was suffocating, the energy radiating off him, dark and commanding. Slowly he turned. His face was hollowed, sunken, like he had been drained of life but kept moving anyway. His eyes, empty pits of black, locked onto mine. You were never meant to take it, he rasped. His voice was not human. It was layered, deep, ancient. You do not understand what you have done. The room warped around us, flashes of the past colliding with reality. I saw him, the real him, long ago, standing in front of a circle of candles, the hat in his hands, whispering incantations in a language I didn't understand. I saw the way the shadows twisted around him, swallowing him whole. He didn't control the hat. The hat controlled him. It had always been that way. I saw fire, screams, the house burning, but the hat, untouched, waiting for the next person to find it. And now it had me. I stumbled back. I don't want it. I don't want any of this. His twisted smile sent a chill through my spine. But it wants you. The vision shattered, and I was back in the ruined house, the hat still clenched in my hands. But I wasn't alone. The man's shadow loomed in the corner, watching, waiting. I had to move fast. I ripped open the metal box, shoving the hat inside. The whisper shrieked, the air vibrating with rage, but I forced the lid shut, locking it tight. The house groaned around me, the walls shaking. It was fighting me. I grabbed the gasoline, pouring it over the box, my hands trembling. Then I struck the match. The flame flickered, small but determined, and then I dropped it. The fire roared to life, engulfing the box. The whispers turned into screams, piercing, furious, inhuman. The room darkened, shadows writhing like something was dying. The house shook violently, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. I stumbled back, shielding my face as the flames consumed the box. Then, silence. The house stopped shaking. The air stilled, and for the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. I walked out of the house, my body exhausted, but my mind clear. I turned back one last time. The house was still there, dark and broken, but it felt different. The weight that had once pressed against my chest was gone. The hat was gone. I had won. But as I walked away, a nagging thought settled into the back of my mind. The hat had survived one fire before. What if it could survive another? And what if someday someone else found it? I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Maybe it was over. Maybe it wasn't. But one thing was certain. If the hat ever returned, I would be ready. Months later, I moved away from town. I started over, left the past behind. But one night I was scrolling through my phone when a news article caught my eye. Mysterious fire at abandoned house. Remains of metal box found in ashes. My blood ran cold. The box, it should have been gone, burned, destroyed. But someone had found it. I clicked on the article, my breath hitching. No trace of the object inside was recovered, it read. However, authorities are investigating reports of an antique top hat being seen at the site before the fire. I dropped my phone, my hands shaking. Somewhere, out there, the hat was waiting, and it wouldn't be waiting for long. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, then comment down below and let me know what you think. I'll see you next time with another story. Until then, keep smiling and don't forget to like and subscribe.